Matthew chapter 8. I have a couple of just wee headings are going to come up on the screen here. You might be able to see it, you might not. That's fairly faint. Again, it's a picture that was painted by the Dutch artist Rembrandt. And in 1633, Rembrandt painted this picture, which is entitled "The Storm on the Sea of Galilee." And it was sold, actually bought by a man for his wife, actually, and then it was held in a museum, an art gallery in New York. And in 1990, on the 18th of March, two thieves dressed as police officers came into the museum, the art gallery, and stole it. They cut it out of its frame, rolled it up, and off they went, and it hasn't been seen since. So if you should be kind of out round the car boot sale or maybe in some of the local charity shops, and you see something that looks like this, you might want to offer him a few pounds for it because it could be worth a bit more than that. But what Rembrandt did was he captured his impression of this story in Matthew chapter 8. And we're going to read it together, and then we're going to just say a few things about this story here. Matthew 8, verse 23. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves. But he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he said unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? We'll finish there at verse 27. In reading that, I don't know if you feel as though that Rembrandt has captured the scene fairly well. I think perhaps he has, because it speaks about the waves crashing in on the bow of the boat and a sense of fear that gripped people on that particular occasion. Boats like this were commonplace on the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes they were fishing boats, sometimes they were carrying cargo, and it wouldn't have been an unusual scene to see lots of boats crisscrossing the Sea of Galilee. But this particular occasion, something happened that left the disciples, and if you remember, some of them were well used to the sea. Because James and John, Peter and Andrew, they were all fishermen. And they made their living off fishing in the Sea of Galilee, and so it shouldn't have been a new experience for them, but something happened on this occasion that shook them. Because, as we've read, a storm brews up. And it leaves them fearful and worried. I don't know if you've ever been on a boat that's been really rocky. Maybe Larstranrar. I don't know if you've ever been in the old Isle of Man boat that used to go out of Belfast. And often it was caught in lots of turbulence, or on one, the worst I ever had was on Liverpool to Belfast. And it was just, I left the contents of my stomach long before I actually got out of the harbour in Liverpool. But I'm not so much talking about those actual storms that can just shake us off our feet, or that can make us feel very unsettled or perhaps very sick. I'm thinking tonight, just for a few minutes, about some of those storms that enter our lives that are not physical in this sense, not a physical storm, even though we get all kinds of amber warnings for storms through the weather forecast. But I'm thinking about some of the experiences that you and I face in our lives, and they could well be described as like a storm hitting us. And I've only got 7 simple statements or truths about storms, and hopefully they'll come up here. A few things to remember about storms. The first one is this. Storms happen to everybody at some time or other. The Sea of Galilee lies in a basin. Now, I've never been in the Holy Lands. Some of you perhaps have. But I'm told that the Sea of Galilee, it kind of lies in a basin. And warm air currents come off the mountains and they whip up turbulent storms on the Sea of Galilee. And they happen. And that's the same as the storms that come upon our lives. None of us are immune. None of us are exempt. The fact that we are placed here in this fallen world, a world that's under the curse of sin because of sin that happened in the Garden of Eden, our world is under that curse. It's a broken world we live in. And so difficult things do happen in our lives. And we can't opt out of it. Storms happen to everybody at some time. Maybe you might say, well, right now, life's pretty good. Right now, my situation is kind of all right. And I've come through life to this point, and it's been fairly okay. I haven't had any major catastrophes in my life or that of my family, and I seem to have gotten off quite lightly as far as storms are concerned. But sooner or later, storms come. That was the case on the Sea of Galilee. They just happened. And for you and I, things will happen in our lives that we maybe hadn't anticipated. We certainly didn't welcome them, but they come. Storms happen. We live in a fallen world that's blighted by sickness, pain, bereavement, sadness, hunger, poverty. Life throws many storms our way, and it can often leave us reeling from the impact of them. If ever you want a description of how a storm leaves you feeling, again, I'm flicking over to Psalm 107 here really quickly. And it's a description of how a storm has left somebody feeling. Psalm 107, verse 26 says this. No, I'm in the wrong place. Here we go. They mount up to the heaven. No, verse 25. He commandeth and raiseth the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to the heaven. They go down again to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man and are at their wits' end. Ever been at your wits' end? Ever been in an experience that has just shook you to your very core, and you would say, well, it's just left me reeling. I was up, I was down. It's left me reeling to and fro and been at my wits' end. Don't think it's strange. Don't think it's strange because of the trials that come across our way. Because they happen. Think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, as though some strange thing has happened to you. Storms happen to everybody at some stage. Number 2, storms can come upon you even when you're following Jesus. If you look at this passage again that we read in Matthew chapter 8, it says, and I kind of paused at this as we were reading through, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea. Now, whenever the Bible was written in its original text in the Greek, there were no verse divisions. It didn't take a wee stop after verse 23, a full stop, and then a new line, verse 24, and another verse. It didn't happen like that in the original text. It just went through without hardly a breath. It said, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea. You can be following Jesus and still experience a tempest. And sometimes that doesn't sit very comfortably with the way we think. Because there's a mistaken idea that's going around in lots of Christian circles that says, do you know, if you were really following Jesus, then you wouldn't be experiencing those troubles in your life. If you were really following Jesus fully and closely, you wouldn't be facing all these trials and difficulties. But that's exactly what happened. The disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest. They were following Jesus, but a tempest arose. And if ever you want to rewrite the Bible, not that you should be doing that, of course, but this is the way that sometimes the way we would love, because of our experiences, we would love to rewrite it like this. The disciples failed to follow Jesus, therefore a great storm arose. Doesn't say that. The disciples turned back from following him, therefore a great tempest arose. Doesn't say that either. The disciples followed afar off, and therefore a great storm arose. None of those are true. The disciples followed Jesus, and a storm arose. Storms can come to the most godly people, to the most faithful followers of Jesus, whose lives are not hypocritical, who are seeking, as far as they can under God, to live a life of honor and integrity and honesty before God, and still trials come. You can be suffering trials even whenever you're following the Lord. And there'll be somebody who'll come along in your difficult and painful experiences, and they'll say, do you know, if only you were more spiritual. If only you prayed more. If only you were living closer to the Lord, you wouldn't be going through all this that you're facing right now. That's a load of nonsense. Don't ever listen or pay any heed to somebody who comes and offers you that advice, because storms can come to the most godly people. The most holy followers of Jesus who are living with integrity, they can still experience the storms of life. Remember Job? Job's so-called friends came alongside whenever Job had suffered so much in the loss of his family and his health and his livelihood. And they came along and they tried to get alongside Job. And they kind of insinuated that Job was somehow harboring secret sin. But that wasn't the case. Job was a faithful follower of the Lord, and the Lord allowed those experiences to come to him, even though he was faithfully following the Lord. Trials, storms can come even when you're following Jesus. Number 3, storms can rise very suddenly. I said earlier, I've never been to the Holy Land. My friend has. And his mother also, and he told me about 2 photographs that his mother took. Back in the day, whenever you couldn't take photographs on your phone, you had to take photographs with a camera. And she has 2 photographs of the same scene. The little accommodation where they were staying overlooked the Sea of Galilee. And one of the photographs is taken in the morning time. And it's a scene of perfect serenity. Things like a mill pond. There's not a ripple on the surface. It's a glorious looking scene, and she took a photograph of this. That afternoon, there was waves crashing over the sea wall and a big angry sky, and she took a photograph of that. Same scene, just a couple of hours in between. The storms can rise very suddenly on the Sea of Galilee, I'm told. And storms can happen in our lives very quickly. Ever been in a situation where everything seemed to be going fairly well, and suddenly you get a piece of news and it just turns a calm into a storm in no time at all? And often all it takes is 2 words to plunge us into the midst of a storm. It's cancer. I'm leaving. You're fired. She's dead. 1 minute life is good. Things are going relatively well. And suddenly a piece of news comes and it just knocks you for 6. And we all experience this to some extent or other. They can rise very, very suddenly, these storms. When you're left numb, you're left you hardly know what end of you's up. And what started off as a fairly normal day, by the time you go to bed that night, your whole world's in a turmoil. Your family's in a turmoil. And you don't know what way to turn. Storms can rise very quickly. Number 4. Storms can terrify the seasoned traveler. I said earlier, some of these who were on the boat with Jesus that day were seasoned travelers on the Sea of Galilee. They were fishermen. They got their livelihood off of that sea. But they're found in this particular occasion saying, "Lord, save us, we perish." How would you feel if you're in the Lawrence in our boat and you saw one of the crew members getting into a panic and saying, "Oh, save us, we're dying, we're perishing"? You wouldn't be filled with confidence now. And these people were seasoned fishermen, well used to being on the Sea of Galilee, but they're terrified. And they're terrified because of the violence of this storm. The word that's translated in your Bible in verse 24, where it says there arose a great tempest. The word great is translated from the Greek word mega. You know something, if something's mega, it's big. It's large, it's mega, big. So that's the word here, it's a great. And the word storm is the word seismos. You might be familiar with the idea of seismology is the study of earth tremors. And a seismograph measures tremors on a particular scale, of seismic scale. So this is a mega seismos, a great storm. This was a storm that shook the earth. There was a shaking that left these seasoned travelers so terrified. Now you might have been on the Christian pathway for quite a few years. And you might be able to share testimony of how God has helped you in many situations, and rightly so. And you might be able to talk about how that you've found peace in circumstances that have been just really trying, and that's grand. But there can come experiences that even seasoned, faithful, well-traveled believers can be shaken. These disciples who were well-traveled, they were shaken. Even though they had been on that pathway on the Sea of Galilee for many years, and you may have been on the Christian pathway for many years, but there can be experiences that may shake you and me. I'm not trying to say that in any way that I'm immune from this, because I face them too. And they can shake you. And you know that God is there. You know that God is caring for you, that he has you in his hand. But the circumstances are so difficult that we're even apt to doubt that. Storms can terrify even the seasoned traveler. Number 5. The best way to turn in a storm is towards Jesus. And we know that sitting here in the comfort of this church building this evening. Sure, we know that. But it's interesting that whenever storms do come and we're right in the thick of it, sometimes the obvious things, we're blind to them. And we get overwhelmed by all that's going on around about us. A wee bit like whenever on another occasion Peter steps out of the boat during a storm to try and make his way to Jesus, the storm brews up and he is somehow distracted by the waves and the wind, and he takes his eyes off the Lord. The best way to turn in a storm is towards Jesus. They do that. His disciples came to him, verse 25, and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. I'd love to know what their thought process was before they went and stirred him. I wonder, did they try some other plan to somehow stabilize the boat to get rid of some of the cargo or whatever? I don't know if they tried a few other options first and then went to Jesus as a last resort. Because I know sometimes that's what we do. Whenever trials and difficulties come, we'll think of this, that, and the other, and we'll try to sort out this, and this. And then it seems as though as a last resort, when all of that fails, we'll turn to the Lord. But the best way to turn in a storm is towards Jesus. I don't know, and I'm in the privileged position as a guest speaker today. I don't know what's going on in your lives and that of your family, and yet my counsel is simply this: whatever's going on, turn to Jesus, even though you can't see right now what's going on, that he's in control. Because the other option is to turn away from him. And sadly, that's sometimes what happens whenever things happen in our lives that are maybe hurtful or disturbing or distressing. We somehow put the blame on God and say, why is this happening to me? Lord, if you loved me, this wouldn't be happening. And we can end up with a chip on our shoulder and we can somehow turn away from the Lord. You've probably met people, and they've got a bad attitude towards God, towards the church, and towards Christians because they feel as though that somehow or other something happened in their life and they've blamed God for it, and they've been sore about it ever since. You try to witness to somebody like that, it's really difficult because they turned away from the Lord in that moment of crisis rather than turning to him. The best way to turn in a storm is towards Jesus. There's a Christian group that I sometimes listen to, and they have a song called Cry Out to Jesus. I'm just going to read some of the lyrics for you. To everyone who's lost someone they love long before it was their time, you feel like the days you had were not enough when you said goodbye. To all of the people with burdens and pains keeping you back from your life, you believe that there's nothing and there's no one who can make it right. Here's the chorus. There is hope for the helpless, rest for the weary, love for the broken heart. There's grace and forgiveness, mercy and healing. He'll meet you wherever you are. Cry out to Jesus. Cry out to Jesus. When you're lonely and it feels like the whole world is falling on you, just reach out, cry out to Jesus. Cry to Jesus. There's hope for the helpless, rest for the weary, love for the broken heart. There's grace and forgiveness, mercy and healing. He'll meet you wherever you are. Cry out to Jesus. Maybe you've never done that. Maybe you're here tonight, and I don't know, maybe you've never accepted Jesus or cried out to him. You can cry out to him. You can find peace and forgiveness. The best way to turn in a storm, or at any time for that matter, is towards Jesus. Number 6. Jesus has the power to calm any storm. He spoke. Doesn't tell us on this occasion what he said, but he arose, he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Mark chapter 4 records the words that Jesus said in calming the storm. He said, "Peace, be still." Earlier this morning I mentioned our eldest daughter. When she was a toddler, we were living in County Cavan and working with the Faith Mission. And we were living in an old farmhouse, and across the yard was, whenever we arrived there, it was this an old, like a lean-to where you kept sticks and bits and pieces. But I converted it into a wee study, and that's where I studied. I had my books there, and that's where I worked. And you only had maybe a step from here to the wall, out the back door, across the yard, and into this wee lean-to where I was studying one day. And so I was there working away, and she had been sent out by Beth, by her mum, to come and to fetch me because it was time for lunch. So she comes out across, and it's kind of drizzly all day. She comes across, and she says, "Mommy's looking at you because it's lunchtime." And so I says, "I'll be in just a minute." And so as she left, the door was still lying open a wee bit. And from the wee study where I was, there was still a wee bit of the lean-to before you had to step out from underneath the corrugated iron roof and walk across into the back of the house. But when she was in talking to me, it started spilling rain really heavily. And so whenever she goes back out to make her way into the back of the house, she's timid about going across the yard because it's emptying out of the heavens. And so I was just reading up what I was doing, and I could hear a wee voice. And I was curious to know what the wee voice was saying. So I kind of sneaked over to the door and looked out through the gap. And there she was, only a toddler, standing just in underneath the lean-to, with her hand out like this, going, "Peace, be still." Trying to get rain to stop. Now, I don't know if it did stop. I can't just recall that, but it taught me a fantastic lesson. She must have heard us sharing at some of the children's meetings, or she must have heard us teaching this lesson about how Jesus calmed the storm, and she got it. She got it so much so that she felt as though that standing underneath the lean-to, she could put her hand out and say, "Peace, be still," and it would fare that she would walk on the back of the door. Jesus can calm any storm. You see this great tempest, verse 24, this mega seismos. Look at verse 26. Because he arose, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And guess what? Those two words that are translated great are the same word. It's a mega calm. So there was a mega seismos, a mega storm or tempest. But the calm that was brought about after Jesus spoke, it was also mega. It was also a great calm. It illustrates the fact that even though everything just seemed to be so turbulent, Jesus could calm the storm and bring a great calm. Not just a wee calm, not just that things fared a wee bit, or that seemed to settle down a little bit from an amber warning, or I don't know what the scale, from a red or an orange to an amber warning. No, it was a great calm. The tempest that might be raging over our lives just now, where the outside circumstances, they may still be turbulent, but we can experience calm in the midst of this. I don't want to paint a picture as though that we just need to put our trust in Jesus and everything's going to be hunky-dory the rest of our lives, because it's not like that. Christians still face trials. Christians still suffer illness and bereavement and difficulties in life. Of course we do. But we can know a peace in the midst of that matches the ferocity of the storm. The calm in the middle of it is every bit as great. It's a mega calm. We're going to finish. The last one. Storms can renew and strengthen our faith in God. What manner of man is this, says the disciples, that even the wind and the sea obey him? If this storm hadn't come, they wouldn't have seen nor experienced God's power the way they did. Now, we never want to invite trials and difficulties into our lives, but when they come, there's often a teaching experience in them. These disciples got a glimpse of the power of God that they were never going to get on a calm day. They got an experience of God's power to control the turbulent storm that they wouldn't have got if it would just have been plain sailing across the lake that day. And you and I, we can experience God's power through, even in the midst of those trials and difficulties. They can strengthen and renew our faith in God. When trials come, it's important that we don't waste them. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's important that we don't miss out on a learning experience through those trials where we can put our trust in God and discover in a greater sense who He is that we could never have got without those trials. Remember, one fellow was preaching on one occasion on the life of Joseph. And he was talking about the experience of Joseph down in the pit after the brothers had put him in the pit and they were going to spin a yarn to their father about what had happened to him. A wild goat has got him in this. And the fellow was preaching about this and he said, like Joseph in the pit, there's two ways that we can respond. And when you and I are in those trials and difficulties, there's two ways that we can respond. We can say, how can I get out of this? Or, what can I get out of this? There's a bit of a difference, you see. How can I get out of this is that I want to escape from these trials. And that's a natural response, of course. But here's a different one. What can I get out of this? Lord, the fact that you're allowing this in my life, you've got some plans and purposes that for the life of me I can't see right now, but Lord, I want you to teach me what it is that you're trying to teach me through this experience. That I might trust you more fully, that I might be gripped by the greatness of your power in this situation, or that I might just be able to bear testimony of a peace in the midst of the storm to my family and my neighbours who are watching me, to see how I respond to those difficulties. Lord, what have you got to teach me through this? They can renew our strength and faith in God. We're going to sing in just a minute. It's 353, When Peace Like a River. And again, this is a hymn that we're familiar with. But I'd love that we would think of the words carefully as we read them through. When peace like a river attendeth my way, we're saying it is well with my soul. Again, let's sing it thoughtfully. And let's allow God to even speak to us as we're singing this through. Now, again, it's quite a long hymn, but maybe we should take time to sing it all through. 353 starts.